Chapter 5. Henry woke Samara at 5:30 the following morning. I need to leave for work by 6:15, and we all like to eat breakfast together. Samara groaned, but rolled out of bed. Henry was already dressed for the day. Give me 5 minutes. When she got downstairs 5 minutes later, the girls were sitting at the table wearing their pajamas, and Henry was giving them each a glass of milk. So what should I make for breakfast? She asked. Pancakes, Avi said. Yeah, pancakes, Abby responded. With bacon, Henry told her with a grin. I'm starting to feel like a short-order cook around here, she grumbled under her breath as she got down a mixing bowl and turned on a burner on the electric stove so the griddle could heat while she was mixing up the pancakes. Henry walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her. Thank you for cooking breakfast for us, he whispered against her ear. Samara left the whisk in the bowl and turned around, her mouth going to his. She knew the twins were watching, so she didn't let her hands roam, but she gave him a kiss he wouldn't forget while he was working that day. When he lifted his head, she could see that his eyes seemed a bit glazed. Go sit down so I can cook, she said, reaching for the coffee pot. He'd had the brains to start the coffee before waking her, and she drank a mug full while she stood guard over the pancakes. Once she was seated, they all held hands, and Henry prayed for them again. The girls went on and on during the meal about how she was the best pancake maker in the world. I'm glad you like them. What did Uncle Henry make for breakfast? She had a feeling she already knew the answer, but she felt like she should ask. Cereal, Avi said with a frown. Sometimes Pop-Tarts, Abby said. And we like Pop-Tarts, but pancakes are better. Samara grinned. Well, I'm so glad you're happy with the pancakes. I won't let Uncle Henry feed you cereal anymore. Thank you, Aunt Sammy, the girls said together. Sometimes it seemed like they shared a brain. After breakfast, Henry kissed each girl atop her head. Be nice to Aunt Sammy today. She has a lot to do. When he got to Samara, she stood and wrapped her arms around his neck. You were going to kiss me goodbye as well, right? Henry nodded, brushing his lips against hers. I'll be home around 6. Wow. You're going to be out of the house for 12 hours today? That was going to make for a really long day for her. She hoped it wouldn't be that much every day. He nodded. The house we're working on is about 45 minutes out, and there was a lot of rain that kept us from working. We're pushing to get this one done by our deadline. Samara looked at the girls who were ignoring both of them, eating their pancakes. All right. I'll handle it. Dinner will be ready at 6 when you get here, and we'll just make it work. She wondered if there was another woman alive who could have married the man without getting angry with him about everything he expected. She doubted it. He smiled at her, kissing her softly once more. As he left, he thought about how Samara really was the perfect wife for him. She may not like his decision about having sex, but she was great with the children, and a wonderful cook. Yes, he'd made the right decision. After he was gone, Samara got the girls dressed, letting them dress exactly alike, because she knew she'd still be able to tell them apart by their nail polish. She took a quick shower, while the girls played quietly in their room. When she was dressed, and her hair was back in a ponytail to keep it out of her way, she walked down the hall to check on them. They each had a small pile of books by their beds. That's a lot of books, she said. Don't you think they should stay on the shelf? Abby shook her head. Those are the books we want you to read us tonight. Samara looked at the piles again. That's way too many books to read in one night. Not if you read until Uncle Henry comes home, Avi told her. Samara sighed. What about dinner? I have to teach you girls to cook sometime, don't I? The girls looked at each other, obviously excited by the prospect of helping cook. That would be all right, Avi said. We'll let you teach us to cook. Samara grinned at them, looking at the time on their Minnie Mouse clock. It's time to go see Grandma Betty. Abby jumped to her feet. We love Grandma Betty, but we want to stay with you. Samara frowned. I'll be working here all day. I really need you to go to Grandma Betty's. I'll be picking you up early, though, and we'll read a little before we start cooking supper. Once they were downstairs, she took each girl by the hand, walking them the short distance next door. You two be good for Grandma. We will, they chorused. She waved to the girls as she set out back to the house, glad they already liked her. She went straight upstairs to her office and set up Skype to call Lachele. When Lachele's face popped onto the screen, she had a huge smile. Sammy Sunflower. How's married life? I can't believe you set me up with a man who just wanted someone to mother his dead brother's children. What were you thinking? He wants to wait at least 6 months for sex. He barely knows I'm there if I'm not cooking or taking care of the girls. Lachele grinned. He thinks he only wants someone to take care of the girls, and really that is the reason he contacted me now. He wants you, though. You're perfect for him, and I bet he already realizes it. But give it a little time, Sammy. Keep trying to seduce him. If he hasn't done you within a couple of months, I'll bring you a vibrator. Oh, I can just hear his reaction to that. Do you know what he told those precious girls? He couldn't bathe them every night because it would make their skin fall off. Do you believe? Lachele didn't laugh at that. She cackled. Hysterically. Oh, that's just like a man who doesn't want to have to give baths every night, isn't it? He told them they could only bathe on Saturdays and Tuesdays. When they pointed out that their mother had bathed them daily, he told them he'd gotten them just in time to save their skin. Samara shook her head. Of course, when I bathed them last night, they covered the entire bathroom floor with water while I was reading. You're going to be a great mom to them, Sammy. And then you're going to have more matrimony munchkins from me. I can feel it. Not unless the man starts putting out. He thinks his goobies will shrivel up and fall off if he touches me. Samara sighed. I'm so frustrated with him. I could handle all the kid stuff and all the cooking and cleaning if I just got some out of it. He won't be able to hold out for long. Face it, Sammy. You're a beautiful, intelligent, giving woman. Just jump on him when you go to bed tonight. He will thank you for it later. Samara laughed. I think it's time for you to go vibrator shopping. I have more faith in you than that. Okay, Lachele, what work do you have for me to do today? Lachele smiled. 2 new client interviews. We're going to do a few via Skype and see how they go. I don't want you to have to travel much now that you're married with twins. Give me the information. Asterisk. By the time Henry got home from work, Samara was exhausted. She'd risen early and hadn't stopped working since. Between cooking, the little cleaning she'd been able to accomplish with the girls, and her day job, she felt a little like Cinderella. It would all be worth it if there was sex. But there wasn't. And wouldn't be. Maybe she would take Lachele's advice. Henry walked into the kitchen to see the girls setting dishes at the table, while Samara used a mixer on some mashed potatoes. He took a deep breath, smelling the delicious aromas. I could get used to coming home to these smells. Samara smiled over her shoulder at Henry, glad he was finally home. Dinner will be ready in about 10 minutes if you want to shower. He strode across the kitchen and grabbed her, kissing her soundly on the lips. I'm on my way now. Samara looked back down at the mashed potatoes she was mixing. What was that about? Uncle Henry only knows how to make frozen pizza and cereal, Ava told her. And Pop-Tarts, Abby said. Suddenly Samara understood. She was not only taking care of the children, but she was feeding him all the time. He'd definitely gotten the better end of this deal. He came down with his hair wet, just as Samara was putting biscuits on the table. She'd made a pot roast, mashed potatoes, gravy, broccoli, and biscuits. She slipped into the booth beside Avie, and took Henry's hand when he sat down beside her. After their prayer, Henry said, "You are the best cook in all of Kansas. You truly amaze me, Samara." "She's a good reader too," Avie told him. "She read us a gazillion books before we started cooking." "A whole gazillion? Wow." He looked at Samara, waiting for her to protest all the praise, but she didn't. "I'm just doing what you wanted me to come here for." It wasn't until she said those words that Henry realized their marriage was all one-sided. She'd moved halfway across the country to be his wife, foregoing sex, taking care of twins, and cooking. What was she getting out of it? As soon as they were finished eating, he got up to clear the table. "I'll take care of dishes while you bathe the twins," he offered. "Oh, that would be wonderful." She took the girls upstairs, starting their bubble bath, before hurrying down the hall to get them pajamas and underwear. They seemed to be outgrowing most of their clothes, and though she'd ordered some shirts the night before, she realized it was probably time to just go get them entirely new wardrobes. From what she could see, Henry didn't need her money, so she could spend hers on clothes for the girls. When she got back into the bathroom, both girls had stripped, but were waiting for her to put them in the tub. Once she'd thrown them both in, she picked up her Kindle. "Wash each other's backs, and no splashing water on the floor tonight. No messes." "Okay," Avie said with a grin. The little girl had been in a mischievous mood all evening, and her grin scared Samara a bit. Instead of giving her book her full attention as she would have preferred, Samara watched the girls out of the corner of one eye. When she saw Avie pick up her wash rag and wring it out over her sister's head, she'd known she was right to do so. Abby sputtered before she picked up the soap and threw it at her sister, hitting her in the face with it. Both girls immediately started wailing. Samara set her Kindle on the counter. Abby, stop that this instant. What is wrong with you two?" It was so strange to see the girls fight with each other. It must feel like fighting with your own mirror image. The girls continued to glare at each other. "Avie stole my doll during nap time today," Abby complained. "Abby wouldn't let me choose the naptime book, and it was my turn," Avie protested. "Both of you will stop. If you want to continue to take baths together, then there will be no fights in the bathroom. That's enough of your wild behavior." Abby looked down, obviously contrite. Avie simply glared. Samara found another way to tell the twins apart in that instant. Avie held a grudge and Abby didn't. "Avie? You misbehaved as well, not just your sister." "I don't like Abby. I don't want to be her sister anymore." Samara tried not to laugh at that. "You would hate not having Abby for your sister. You two are acting ridiculously. No more. Do you understand?" Avie glared at her sister one last time before saying, "Yes, ma'am. I'll try to be nice. I'll let you choose the first bedtime book, Avie." "I'm sorry I was mean to you," Abby mumbled. Avie seemed to contemplate her sister's apology. "I forgive you. You chose my favorite book, and that helps a lot." Samara bit her lip. Avie had been holding a grudge for hours, because her sister hadn't let her choose a book, but she'd chosen her favorite. "Really?" She got the girls out of the tub and dressed them in their pajamas. "You have a few minutes before we'll start reading. Want to go down and hug Uncle Henry?" The girls hurried down the stairs in their footed pajamas, Avie leading the way in purple, and Abby bringing up the rear in blue. Samara was determined to color-code the girls as often as humanly possible. When she got down to the bottom of the stairs herself, she found both girls sitting on their uncle. "Uncle Henry," they were squealing. "We missed you while you were gone all day." Samara stayed back, waiting for the girls to have their time. "You did? Did you have a good time with Aunt Sammy?" One of the girls, Samara couldn't tell which one, said, "We love Aunt Sammy. We read books, and we helped cook, and she let us help with laundry, and we got to come home early from Grandma's." "Wow. Sounds like you had a great day," Henry said. "I think we should keep Aunt Sammy." The girls squealed, yelling yes over and over. Samara laughed and stepped into the living room. "It's time for bed, silly girls. Avi, you hurry ahead so you can pick out the first book of the night." Avi took off up the stairs, running straight to the girls' bedroom, with Abby right on her heels. "Those two are something else," Samara told Henry. "They adore you," he told her. "You're exactly what we all needed." She shrugged. Exactly what the girls needed, maybe. She turned to go back upstairs, but he was on his feet in a flash, grabbing her arm. "Exactly what all of us needed. I don't think I knew how much you were missing from my life until you showed up and filled the gap." He turned her to him, kissing her gently. "You're an incredible woman, Samara." She simply shrugged, turning to go back up the stairs, leaving Henry frowning after her. When she slipped into bed that night, Henry was lying on his side, facing the middle of the bed. She wore a t-shirt and panties again, because he obviously didn't care what she wore to bed. She knew she wasn't a model or anything, but she'd always been told she was attractive. Henry made her feel less than desirable. She climbed into bed, moving to the middle, and was surprised when he wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. "I've been unfair to you," he said softly. She looked up at him with surprise. He had been unfair, but she'd never expected him to actually be able to see it. "Why do you say that? You came here, expecting to find a man with no children who wanted to spend his life with you. Instead you got me, with 2 kids, constantly keeping you at arm's length. I'm surprised you haven't left me by now." Samara smiled. "Well, I signed a contract saying I'd stay. Honestly, if that contract hadn't been signed, I'd have left after our little discussion in the bride's room at your church." He sighed. "I know. I've been very rigid. I was really trying to protect us both, but it fell really flat. I didn't think anyone would stick around with the kind of work required with the girls." He took a deep breath, looking into her eyes. "Are you still willing to stay? To be my wife? Or are you planning on running in a year? Are you going to give me reason to run? I don't believe in divorce. Unless you cheat or start hitting me, I'm sticking around." He lowered his mouth to hers, kissing her passionately. His hands moved over her back, one of them pulling her closer while the other explored her bottom through her panties. Her shirt wasn't large enough to be much of a barrier. Samara sank into his kiss, her arms wrapping around him. She brought one leg up and around his calves in an effort to get closer. He'd been covered when she got into bed, so it was then she noticed he was naked. Henry? Shut up and kiss me, Samara." Her heart beat faster as she realized he wasn't going to stop. Now she wished she'd worn her pretty nightgown from their wedding night. She started to ask him if she could change, but she didn't want to affect the mood. The man was finally willing to let her ride him like a cowgirl, and she wasn't about to complain. His kisses were almost frantic, his hands moving over her body with one purpose and one purpose only, to bring her to the same state of arousal he was obviously in. He drew away, kneeling on the bed, and pulling her into a kneeling position as well. Catching the hem of her shirt, he pulled it over her head, his eyes all but glazed with desire as he stared at her mostly naked state. He reached out to cup her breasts in his hands, smiling. "They fill my hands perfectly. You were made for me, Sammy. Why didn't I see it the instant I saw you walking down the aisle toward me?" "I don't know, because I did. I knew before I heard you speak, but as soon as you spoke, I was weak in the knees. I would have made love with you in the bride's room at the church, without a single complaint." He groaned. "I'm an idiot for waiting this long." He moved his hands into her panties, cupping her bottom. "I want these off." She chuckled. "Let's take them off then." She pushed them down and shimmied out of them, naked in front of a man for the first time in her entire life. She felt vulnerable for just a moment until he took her into his arms again, his mouth all but attacking hers. Before she knew what was happening, he had her on her back on the bed, and his hand was between her thighs, stroking her core. "Are you ready for me, baby?" Samara nodded, unable to speak for a moment. It was all happening so fast, but it was what she'd been wanting, so she couldn't complain. He moved over her, between her spread thighs. She stroked his cheek as he lay poised above her, ready to make her a part of him. He turned and kissed the hand on his cheek, before leaning down and pressing his lips to hers, just as he thrust softly inside her. Samara let out a low moan. She'd known it would hurt, but somehow she'd forgotten in the heat of the moment. Once he was inside her, he stilled, trying to give her time to adjust to him. He wasn't sure how long he could wait though. She was his, and he needed her. His lips toyed with hers for just a moment before he pulled out and thrust back inside her. "Please tell me it doesn't hurt too much," he mumbled against her lips. It still hurt a bit, but Samara didn't care. "It's fine." She needed him to move inside her. She needed this wanting to end. His thrusts were slow and steady, and obviously very controlled. She wanted so much more from him. More, she whispered, needing to reach that place all her girlfriends had talked about. Henry needed no further coaxing. He moved quickly inside her, his hand reaching down between them to stroke her, hoping it would help her to catch up with him. Her gasps told him it was the right thing to do. Within moments, she was moaning her pleasure, burying her face in his neck so the twins wouldn't hear her from down the hall. As soon as she let go, Henry did too, his neck arching in climax. He rolled to her side, gathering her against him. He panted in her ear, unable to say a word, so he simply clung to her. Samara lay against him, her cheek pressed against his chest. It was exactly as she'd known it would be from the moment they met. The man overrode her senses and turned her into a writhing wanton woman. She was so glad she'd found him. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder, saying nothing else as her eyes drifted closed. Henry stroked her back as he relived the last hour in his head. His bride was everything he'd hoped she wouldn't be. He didn't want to feel so much for the woman he'd married simply so his twins would have a mother figure. He was so glad he'd been wrong about everything. Samara held his heart in the palm of her hand. She was the perfect woman for him. Dr. Lachele Simpson was a genius. Chapter 6. Samara woke to Henry's hands on her, kissing her awake. "Sammy. Time to wake up, sweetheart." "Just 5 more minutes," she groaned. She was sore in places no one should ever be sore. "We don't have 5 minutes. I let you sleep a bit later than I should have already. You promised the girls no more cereal." "I'm getting up." She threw her legs over the side of the bed, feeling more than a bit grumpy. "I hate mornings, you know. Especially when they started so early. The sun was never up when she had to wake." "I'll be down in 5 minutes." Henry watched her pad to the bathroom with a grin on his face. His sweet bride was beautiful. And naked. He wondered if she realized just how naked she was. When Samara caught her own reflection in the bathroom mirror, she let out a gasp. She'd forgotten she was naked. Lovely. Now Henry would think she was an absolutely shameless hussy. A slow smile settled over her face as she thought about their night together. He probably wasn't wrong. Asterisk. The things Samara had ordered online came on Tuesday, and she washed the girls' new clothes and put them in their drawers. She found a large plastic container for the new bath toys and put them into the tub before going to pick up the girls in the afternoon. Hopefully, with toys to play with, they would be less likely to get into mischief and she could read while they bathed. The girls were excited to see her, hugging her and acting as if they'd been apart for weeks instead of hours. She wished there were a way to keep them home with her all day, but she wouldn't be able to get any work done. She loved her job and really didn't want to quit to be a stay-at-home aunt. Was a stay-at-home aunt even a thing? She and the girls played some learning games at the table while supper cooked. Candyland had never been a favorite, even when she was young, so she played a matching game with letters and numbers, trying to help the girls learn all their letters and numbers before starting kindergarten. They had a year, and she was determined that her girls would be the smartest in the class. She heard the door open, indicating that Henry was home, and her heart started beating a bit faster. Just as she was about to clean off the table to put dinner on, Avi asked, "Will you teach us to read, Aunt Sammy? Mama was working with us before she died, but we never got to learn. Uncle Henry doesn't have time, and Grandma says she doesn't have the patience." "Of course, I'll teach you to read. Reading is one of the most wonderful things in the world. If I'd known you two were interested, we'd have started already." Samara couldn't believe how excited she was at the prospect of teaching the girls to read. Her degree was in business administration, but she'd wanted to be a teacher with everything inside her. She'd been told over and over that the pay was too low for the hours, so she hadn't bothered. Henry walked into the kitchen, ignoring the girls, and grabbed Samara, dipping her over his arm and kissing her. The girls clapped excitedly. "Do I have time to shower before dinner?" "Of course. We'll get dinner on the table, and it'll be ready when you come back down." Samara liked being able to provide him with what he needed when he came in at the end of the day. Henry took the stairs two at a time to go up to shower. When he walked into the bathroom, he stopped short. There was a big bucket of bath toys, including boats. When the girls had moved in with him, he had thrown all their boats away. He didn't want them remembering that it was a boat that had killed their parents. He carefully removed the boats from the bin and left the rest of the toys there. He'd talk to Samara later and let her know why he had done it. When he walked back into the kitchen a few minutes later, the girls were sitting at the table, their plates fixed. Samara was filling drinks for everyone. He took a seat at the table and waited for Samara. Once she was seated, they all held hands, and he prayed for them. Tonight's dinner was a simple casserole, but it was still so much better than he could have made, that he was thrilled to have her there. While Samara was filling the tub for the girls a short while later, she noticed that all the boats had been taken out of the bath toys. She dumped the rest of the toys into the tub and then carefully lifted the girls in. She'd ask Henry about the boats later. She read while the girls bathed, watching them out of the corner of her eye, but the toys kept them occupied. They were obviously very excited to be able to play, and they took some of the small animal squirt toys she'd purchased and shot each other with them. There was much squealing and excitement, but bath time went much better than it had the last couple of nights. Once she'd read the girls their books, she went back into the room she shared with Henry, stifling a yawn. He was waiting for her in bed, and she brushed her teeth before stripping down to nothing and climbing into bed with him. What was the point in wearing something to bed when he'd just take it back off anyway? "What happened to the boats?" she asked softly. Henry shrugged, obviously embarrassed about something. "The toy boats?" "Yeah. The girls told me they wanted bath toys, including boats, so I bought them a bunch. When I gave the girls a bath a little while ago, all of the boats were missing." "Why were the boats missing?" "I don't want the girls to get upset by seeing the boats." Samara blinked. "You think seeing toy boats will upset them because their parents were killed in a boat?" "Yeah. Don't you?" "No, I really don't. I'm not a child psychologist, but I think if they play with toy boats, it will make things go more smoothly for them when they see real boats later in life. I think if we completely remove them from their lives, they'll think that boats are somehow bad. They're not. What happened to their parents was bad." "Maybe you're right." Henry didn't know how to deal with young girls. He'd never been around kids in his life. So I can put the boats back into the bathroom? She asked. He nodded. Yeah. I'm not trying to make them afraid of anything. I just want to make sure they don't get upset over any silly things that I can prevent. So did you notice I came to bed naked? She asked. He laughed. You sure do know how to change a subject, wife. It's one of my skills. Wanna see another one? She asked. He nodded. I'd love to. She moved into his arms, kissing him. I've got skills that will knock your socks off. I'm not wearing any. Even better. The following days fell into a pattern. Samara got up early and cooked, got the twins ready, walked them next door, worked all day, picked up the girls, worked with them on their reading lessons while she cooked dinner, bathed them, read to them, and then she went back to her honeymoon suite, and she and Henry learned a lot together. By the time Saturday rolled around, she was exhausted and ready for the weekend. Thankfully, everyone slept a little later than usual. It was 7 when she woke up to the twins excitedly climbing into bed with her. She wrapped the sheet tightly around herself, because she hadn't dressed yet. Henry brought her a cup of coffee in bed and handed it to her. Thank you. She looked at the twins, wondering what they wanted from her. Are we going to read today? Avi asked with a grin. We can read for a while if you want. Abby jumped up. We do want. I want to learn to read fast. Samara smiled, pulling to a sitting position with her back against a pillow on the headboard so she could sip her coffee. Why are you in a hurry? We want to read all the time like you do. Avi told her. Well, I don't read all the time. What she needed more than anything was the time to read a full book beginning to end. She couldn't help but wonder if Henry would be able to make that happen for her. Looking at Henry, she asked, would you be willing to watch the girls while I hit the grocery store today? I could make better meals if I could pick stuff out for myself. She frowned. I'm going to assume there's no grocery delivery in T-ville. He laughed. There's barely pizza delivery in T-ville. Well, then I'd better go. You'll watch the girls? Of course, I will. You run away and get groceries. Will you fix us breakfast first? Samara laughed. I'm not going to let my favorite girls starve. Henry frowned. What about me? Maybe the girls will let you eat scraps from their plates. Nice to see where I rank. Let me shower, and I'll run down and fix breakfast. I'll go to the grocery store right after we eat. He nodded. I'm going to need to do a bit of paperwork today, but it shouldn't take more than 40 minutes or so. That's fine. I'm going to need to lounge in my bed and read an entire book today. That shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 hours. He frowned. Seriously? If I can make it happen, it would make me happier than anything else in the world. Then we'll make sure you get to do some reading. He leaned over the bed and kissed her softly. I want to keep my wife happy. That's because you're a very smart man. Now if you three will just skedaddle, I'll shower so I can make breakfast happen. Henry picked up both girls, carrying them from the room, and shutting the door behind him. See you later. 20 minutes later, Samara was downstairs, and all 3 of them were sitting at the table waiting for her to cook something for them. They really needed to learn to feed themselves. What do you want to eat this morning? We voted while you were showering. We want scrambled eggs, sausage, and toast. With orange juice, Avi added. All right. I can do that. Samara quickly set to work on breakfast while the other 3 continued to talk. 30 minutes later, Henry promised that he and the girls would do the breakfast dishes, and she hurried out the door to go to the store. Really, it wasn't so much of a hurry to shop as a hurry to be alone and do what she wanted for a short while. She hadn't yet taken time to get to know the new town she lived in. She felt like she was starting to lose Samara under all of the duties of being a new wife and aunt. Once she reached the store, she got a cart, determined to walk up and down every single aisle in the store. It was a small town, and people would stop and talk constantly, blocking the aisles to others. It was obviously the place to be on a Saturday morning in T-ville. A couple of people recognized her from her wedding, which was a surprise to her. She definitely didn't have her hair fixed as nicely as she had that day. She never recognized someone from one minute to the next unless she'd had a significant conversation with them, and then she still sometimes didn't recognize them. "Oh, you married Henry Crider. His 2 nieces are just beautiful girls. Will you keep them and mother them?" Samara blinked at the older woman who had asked the question. "What else would I do with them? They're part of the package, and I already love them as if they were my own." "You can say that, but you don't have any of your own, do you? When you and Henry do have your own, you'll want to find some place to ship them off to. There must be a boarding school somewhere that would take the little hellions." The woman had white hair and blue eyes, and Samara wanted nothing more than to stab her with a fork. "How dare you say that to me? I will always love those girls, and they will definitely not be shipped off somewhere, to a boarding school or anywhere else." The woman shrugged. "I'd certainly be shipping them off. No one should be burdened with other people's children as newlyweds." She walked off, obviously sensing Samara's anger. Stabbing that woman in the eye with a fork would be too good for her. Maybe she should be boiled in acid. She was stopped 5 minutes later. "Oh, you're Henry's new wife." This woman was more her age. "None of us ever thought he'd marry, and he probably wouldn't have if it hadn't been for the twins. Adorable girls, but no one wants to have to deal with them all the time." "Why do you say that?" "I love his girls." "Yeah, but you don't really want to raise other people's kids. I feel bad for you being stuck with them." "I don't feel stuck," Samara told her. "I truly care about them, and I don't care who gave birth to them." "I bet you'll feel differently when you have children of your own." Samara was glad to see her walk off. Why did no one seem to think she could just care for the girls for themselves? Many people around the world adopted children. Was this really different? Fortunately, she was able to complete her shopping with no more run-ins with busy-bodied women. When it was that bad in the grocery store, she was not looking forward to church the next day. Every woman there would be giving her advice and telling her how to be a better mother to the girls. She was a Christian, but meddling women sometimes made her want to avoid church entirely. When she got home, Henry was sprawled in the family room with the girls, and they were watching The Lion King. He jumped up to help her carry the groceries in. She got everything put away, and rearranged the kitchen to suit her tastes better while she was doing it. There were so many things around the house that she felt she should be changing and making better, but she just didn't have the energy to do any of it. Maybe after a day of reading, she would feel up to making the changes on Sunday. Pulling the crock pot out of the pantry, she put in the ingredients for supper, and pushed start. That done, she went to the family room. "I'm going to go upstairs and read for a while," she told Henry. "Come get me when you guys start getting hungry, and I'll fix something. How about I go get something fast foodish for lunch? That way you don't have to feed us." She considered that for a moment before nodding. "I'd like that a lot if you don't mind." "I don't mind at all. I'll even take your van and take the girls with me, so you can just laze about and read for as long as you want." She wrapped her arms around him and kissed him softly. "Thank you. This means the world to me." "You're welcome." Henry walked back into the family room to sit and watch movies with the girls. He didn't mind, because he always did it with a laptop on his lap, and he played computer games. Sometimes he needed to do something mindless as well. Samara rushed upstairs and grabbed her Kindle. She sat in the chair beside the bed first, and she chose the next book in the series by one of her favorite authors. It had been out for days, and she hadn't yet had a chance to devour it. Life had sure taken a strange turn. She was just starting the last chapter when Henry came into the bedroom. The girls and I are about to get lunch. Want me to surprise you? Samara didn't bother looking up from her Kindle. Sure. Whatever. Henry frowned. He knew she hadn't really heard him, but he'd asked. When they got home, she couldn't complain if she didn't like what he'd brought. When Samara finished the book, she checked Facebook for her favorite author-reader group, Pioneer Hearts. All of the books mentioned were historical Western romances, and that made her very happy. She'd even built up personal friendships with many of the authors. She skimmed through the group, not looking for any of the silly chat or jokes about Bob. No, she was looking to see if any of her favorite writers had any new books out. Ah. Amelia Adams had put out another book in her Kansas Crossroads series. She followed the link and one-clicked it, immediately opening it to the first page. There was no need to even read the blurb with her favorite writers. Their books were always worth buying. She heard the front door slam just as she opened the book, and with a great effort, set her Kindle down. She needed to go eat with her new family, not get involved in another book. She reluctantly went down the stairs and into the kitchen, seating herself at the table. Henry passed food around to everyone. Samara had never heard of the restaurant whose name emblazoned the sack, but she was certain it was probably a small-town thing. There were few of those in Manhattan. After the prayer, she took her first bite of the cheeseburger, and she wanted to moan with pleasure. Burgers were usually nasty in her opinion, but this one was good. It made her wonder something. Do you know how to grill? Henry nodded. Of course, I do. It's a manly task that my father made certain I was a master of before he and my mother moved back to Scotland. I may buy some steaks and have you grill out tomorrow night. Hot dogs. Abby shouted. Steaks and hot dogs, Samara amended. I don't know what I was thinking. Me neither, Abby said, a grin on her face. Do you girls want your reading lesson after lunch, and then you can take your nap? No nap. Just the reading lesson. Abby said. Both or neither? The girls looked at each other. They'd never been told they were allowed to skip nap time before, but they really wanted the reading lesson. Both, Abby finally said. I think that's a very wise decision, Samara told them. Henry watched the whole exchange with a grin on his face. He needed to call Lachele and thank her. Not only had she found the perfect wife for him, but the perfect mother figure for the girls. Everything was working out the way he needed it to, and he couldn't be happier. Samara cleaned off the table as soon as lunch was over, and brought out the cards she was using to help the girls learn to read. She'd made them herself, and they were working very well so far. I'm going to go and do that paperwork I told you about, Henry said, excusing himself. Oh, that's fine. I'm going to do the reading lesson, and put the girls down for their nap. I'll probably read myself after. One of my favorite authors just put out a new book in a series I'm reading. He nodded, wishing she wasn't so involved in her reading. She'd put it on hold all week, as far as he could tell, but she was making up for lost time this weekend. 30 minutes later, the girls had been tucked into bed for their naps, and she was settled back in her reading chair, engrossed in the lives of the girls living at the Brody Hotel. She finished 2 more books before going downstairs to finish supper. She felt a little guilty that she'd spent so much time reading and left Henry with the girls, but she'd needed the alone time. The girls were outside with Henry, and she smiled. She could read while she cooked. That's what she liked to do anyway. She preheated the oven for the biscuits she was planning to make to go with the thick stew she had simmering in the crock pot. She popped open a can of biscuits and placed them on a pan after quickly spraying it with Pam. She sat down at the table, waiting for the oven to beep at her and let her know it was preheated. When the beep came, she slipped the biscuits into the oven with one hand while still holding her Kindle with the other, never taking her eyes off the page. She pushed the buttons for the right amount of time. She returned to her spot at the kitchen table and waited for the timer to go off. When the timer did go off, she walked back to the stove, grabbed the oven mitt, and put it on, still never taking her eyes from her Kindle. As she grabbed the hot biscuits from the oven, her arm brushed against the top rack, and she dropped her Kindle as she gasped in pain. Carefully taking the biscuits out, she calmly shut off the oven, before hurrying to the sink to stick her arm under cold water. She sighed. Why couldn't she stop burning herself? She felt like such a klutz. When Henry and the girls came into the house a few minutes later, he found her still standing there. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "I burned my arm on the stupid oven." "How?" She shrugged, not meeting his eyes. Henry saw the Kindle on the floor and walked over, picked it up and set it on the counter. "I don't want you to read while you're cooking again. Now I understand what your brother was talking about. I'd rather you burned every meal you ever cooked than you burned yourself." "It doesn't happen often," she told him. "I haven't cut myself badly in over a year." Henry shuddered at the thought. "Please promise me you'll stop reading while you cook." "It's just not safe." Samara shrugged. "I've been doing it my whole life. I don't get hurt more than once a year or so. That's once a year too often. I don't want to hear about you hurting yourself, simply because you couldn't put a book down." "Fine. I won't read and cook. I only did it tonight because the girls weren't helping me." She looked over at the girls who were watching with wide eyes. "I never read while I cook when you're helping me, do I?" Both girls shook their heads, but they kept looking at Samara like they were afraid of something. Finally, Avi asked, "You're not going to die now, are you?" Samara pulled her arm out from under the water, and immediately crouched in front of the girls, showing them her arm. "No, it's just a little burned. See? I'll be all right." She wrapped her arms around both of them, holding them tightly. "I'm not going to run off and die anytime soon. I promise. We love you, Aunt Sammy." "I love you too." Holding them both, her eyes met Henry's. "I promise." He nodded, indicating he understood she was promising for the girls and not herself. Chapter 7. Fortunately, Samara didn't see the women who had been rude to her at the grocery store at church the following day. It made her wonder how they knew Henry, and why they'd been at the wedding. She hadn't mentioned it to him, though, so she didn't feel like she could ask. Several people asked about the enormous bandage on her arm, and she rolled her eyes. "I got a little burn cooking, and Henry panicked, so I get to wear this huge bandage until he determines that it's healed enough." Henry had taken an entire roll of gauze, some burn ointment, and a gauze pad, and all but created a homemade cast on her arm. He had wanted her to go to the emergency room at first, but she'd flat out refused, so he'd made do with his first aid kit. The girls stood on either side of Samara, one of them holding each of her hands. "We thought she was going to die," Avi said in a dramatic voice. Abby shook her head. "We're not going to let Aunt Sammy die, though, so it's our job to watch over her and make sure she doesn't read while she's cooking ever again." The woman Samara was talking to was in her 30s, with short blonde hair and green eyes. She put her hand over her mouth to hide a laugh. "No more reading while you're cooking." Samara rolled her eyes. "I've been reading while cooking for years." "And you've never hurt yourself before?" "Because that really doesn't sound safe to me." The woman frowned at Samara. "I haven't had an injury bad enough to go to the hospital in over a year." Samara knew most people wouldn't be impressed by those statistics, but they were really good for her. "Wow. That long?" The woman's voice was filled with sarcasm. "I'm Gisela Fletcher." "Nice to meet you." "Samara Royal, I mean Crider." "How long before I get used to the new name?" She shook her head, embarrassed. Abby spoke up. "Now you're a Crider just like we are." "That means we're family." Samara smiled down at Abby, thinking it was time to redo their nail polish. Most of what she'd done the week before had worn off. We are family, and I'm so glad. Now I get to keep you forever and ever. Both girls wrapped their arms around her, and Samara smiled at them. I'm so glad you love me as much as I love you. Gisela nodded a bit. You've won them both over very quickly. I'm surprised. Why's that? Oh, I'm the nursery coordinator here, and the girls didn't even speak for their first 2 months here. They barely started warming up to my staff now after 4 months. Samara shrugged, smiling down at the girls who were both watching her with wide eyes, as if they were worried what Samara would think about what she'd just heard. Maybe no one approached them right. We haven't had a problem from the first moment I've met them. You're lucky then. Gisela smiled at Samara. I'm so glad you're here though. We usually give newly married women a few months before asking them to help out in the nursery. Samara blinked. Oh, is that what this was about? I'd love to help in the nursery. I did at my church in Manhattan. I love kids of all ages. She smiled at the other woman. Where do I check them into Sunday school? Avi grabbed her hand, clinging to it. We don't want to go to Sunday school. Can we stay with you? Please, Aunt Sammy? Samara looked down at Avi. You don't like Sunday school? Do you want me to go with you? Abby shook her head adamantly. Let us stay with you and Uncle Henry. We'll be quiet. We promise. Samara knelt down and hugged the twins to her. Of course you can stay with us. If there are any problems with misbehavior, you'll have to go to Sunday school next week. We'll be good, they chorused. Samara stood up, looking at Gisela. I guess they're staying with us this week. It might need to be a gradual transition with them going to Sunday school. Gisela shook her head. You're spoiling them. I'm not spoiling them. They seem genuinely fearful about going to class with the others. Has something happened there? Of course not. All of the teachers are hand-chosen by me. I wouldn't let anything bad happen to them. Samara shrugged. I'll talk to them more when we get home. They may go to Sunday school next week, and they may not. For now, they're frightened, and I won't have them go until I find out why. Gisela turned her back and walked away without another word. Samara sighed. She was making enemies quickly in T-ville. It wouldn't be long before she'd have to ask Henry to move away from his home, simply to keep him from being lynched by the husbands of women she'd offended. She had the girls by their hands when she walked to the pew, moving to sit beside Henry. He frowned when he saw the girls. Why aren't they in Sunday school? He asked. She frowned, relating how upset they'd been at the idea of going. I don't know why, but I'll find out. I'll talk to them about it this week. For today, they promised to be on their best behavior, so I'm going to let them stay with us. Do you think something could have happened in the nursery? Samara shrugged. I really have no idea, but that was real fear on their faces. If they're afraid to go to Sunday school, something is wrong. We'll talk to them when we get home. Thanks for trusting me. The girls were as well behaved as they'd promised. When it was time to stand and sing, they did. When it was time to quietly bow their heads for the prayer, they did. They were as well behaved as the teenagers throughout the church, and Samara was more than a little proud of them. Once the service was over, Samara whispered to Henry. I can cook lunch, but I think we should go out somewhere. I think it would be good for us to talk to the girls somewhere other than home. He nodded, looking down at them. You two were the best behaved kids in the whole church. How did you do that? The girls had identical grins of pleasure on their faces as they walked toward the back of the sanctuary. Pastor John stopped them on their way out. He squatted down and looked at the twins. What did you think of my sermon? Abby smiled. It was good. I liked how you talked about people not judging each other. You did? I liked that part too. I liked how you talked about how it's okay not to do exactly what everyone else does. Does that mean it's okay if we don't go back to Sunday school? Avi asked. Pastor John frowned. You don't like Sunday school? Both girls shook their heads emphatically. We hate it. We want to sit with Uncle Henry and Aunt Sammy every week. Well, I think that would be up to them, but I don't mind at all. If one of you started running up and down the aisle singing loudly or jumping up and down in your seats, you wouldn't be able to stay in the sanctuary for worship, but you were great. He got to his feet, shaking hands with both Samara and Henry. Any idea why they don't want to go to Sunday school? He asked, trying to keep his voice down. No idea, Samara responded. They were almost hysterical at the very idea. I'm going to talk to them and see what we can figure out. Where did your brother attend church, Henry? They went to Bobby's church, the little Baptist church across town. I don't have any idea how they did there. The pastor frowned. I know they have Sunday school for the little ones, just like we do here. I might find out if something happened there to scare them. Would you mind if I put out feelers about that? The pastor's a good friend of mine. I wouldn't mind a bit. I'd like to know what's wrong with them, Samara said. They left the church and walked out to the van, Samara automatically getting into the passenger side. I like to drive sometimes, she told Henry. He looked at her. Are you saying you want to drive now? She shook her head. Nope. I just like to have a turn sometimes. Am I ever going to understand the way your mind works? Probably not. Few people do. Except maybe Lachele. As they drove, Samara thought about how she wanted to talk to the twins about what was making them not want to go to Sunday school. It worried her that they were so adamant about staying with her. It could be that they were afraid of losing her like they had their mother, but she didn't feel like that was the right answer. Henry drove them to a family diner near the church. It was doing a bustling business. We come here after church most Sundays, he told Samara. The girls and I like it, and I used to meet up here with my brother and sister-in-law and the girls after church every week. I'm sure I'll love it then. She turned in her seat to look back at the girls who were happily jabbering to one another. She had no idea what they were saying. Henry grinned at her. Like a lot of twins, they've had their own language since they were tiny. No idea what they're saying. She had each girl by the hand as they walked into the restaurant. The waitress smiled at Henry. Who's this? I got married last weekend. This is my wife, Samara. The girl's eyes widened as she led them to a booth. I didn't know you were getting married. No wonder you weren't here last week. She smiled at the twins who were sitting together on one side of the booth. So how do you like your new aunt? Aunt Sammy is the best aunt in the whole wide world, Abby responded. We're going to keep her. Abby nodded her agreement. We're going to live with her forever and ever. Samara laughed. I sure hope you will. What if you fall in love and marry someone? Will you still live with me then? Of course, Avi told her. Who else would cook for us? Henry grinned. Well, I'd make you Pop-Tarts. Abby shook her head at Henry. I mean real food like Aunt Sammy makes. They all laughed, and then the waitress, who introduced herself as Mary, took their drink orders. Samara looked at the girls. Do you both know what you want to eat? They nodded. We share chicken and dumplings, Abby said. They don't have it on the kids' menu, so the girls share an adult portion. Henry looked down at his menu. I'm getting the meatloaf today. Samara made a mental note of what everyone ordered so she could make it for supper sometime. It was hard to cook for a house full of people when she had no idea what their tastes were in food. She quickly scanned the menu. I'm going to get the baked potato soup. Setting her menu aside, she looked at the girls. Now, why don't you two want to go to Sunday school? Are the kids mean? Do the teachers duct tape you to the walls upside down? The girls giggled, looking at one another as if they were trying to decide what they should say. No one tapes us, but, Avi started. And no one is mean to us, Abby continued. But the teacher told Adam he's stupid when he answered a question wrong, Avi added. He thought the teacher said that Bob was the creator of the heavens and the earth, Abby said. But she said it was God, and he just misunderstood, Avi said with a frown. Adam's not stupid. He's our friend. No one gets to call him stupid. Abby shook her head, obviously upset. No one. Avi agreed. Samara frowned. What's your teacher's name? Did you tell anyone? The girls shook their heads as one. No. We didn't know who to tell. Adam is nice to us, even though we're orphans, Abby said. Why wouldn't they be nice to orphans? Samara asked. Mrs. Johnson, our teacher, said nobody loves orphans. They have to be happy with whatever they get. Avi frowned. Do we really have to be happy with whatever we get? Why did she say that? Samara asked, growing angrier by the second. She was ready to hunt down Mrs. Johnson and give the woman a piece of her mind. Abby looked down at her hands. She gave me a coloring sheet that was torn, so I asked for a new one, and she got mad. I should have been happier with what I got. Samara closed her eyes and counted to 10. I'll be talking to Pastor John on Sunday. Henry shook his head. No, I'll be talking to Pastor John this afternoon. No one gets to treat children that way and get away with it. No, they don't. Especially not our children. The waitress came by then and took their orders. When she left, Henry looked at Samara. I appreciate how you accepted the girls as yours from the moment you met them. It means a lot. Samara looked at the girls and made a silly face. When they made faces back at her, she laughed. How could I not? They're awfully special little girls. They are. Henry agreed, mentally going over how he was going to talk to Pastor John that afternoon. He'd been a member of the same church since he was a small child, but Pastor John was young and had only been there for a few years. He had no idea how the pastor would react to what he had to tell him. Samara grew serious. If we could have you put in the 5-year-old class, would you go back to Sunday school? Or if you had a different teacher? She didn't know how the pastor would handle things. If he replaced the girls' teacher, she hoped they'd reconsider, although they'd been extremely well behaved, so if they needed to stay in the sanctuary for service, they could. She just knew they'd be happier with the other children. The girls looked at one another and nodded. Yes, they said together. Good. Their food came then, and Samara bowed her head as Henry prayed. She hadn't been raised in a house where they prayed before every meal, and when she was alone, she often forgot. She was glad he was so good at remembering and training the girls right. As soon as they arrived home, Henry excused himself to call the pastor and tell him what he'd discovered while Samara did the girls' reading lesson with them. They had already progressed to reading short words. Their mother had obviously worked with them a lot. Henry came back down just as Samara finished reading Hop on Pop Girls, Why Don't You Go Outside and Play for a Bit? He had a sheepish look on his face, and Samara was almost afraid to ask what he'd done. As soon as they were gone, he said, I volunteered you to teach the girls' class until a permanent teacher can be found. Samara nodded. Oh, of course. She had way too much on her plate already, but there was no way she could let the girls skip Sunday school every week. She wanted them to get used to spending time with their peers, not just each other. Henry breathed a sigh of relief. As soon as I offered, I was sure you'd shoot me. You're already doing so much. Samara laughed. It's only a couple of hours per week. I can handle it for a while. She shrugged. How did Pastor John react? He seemed upset, but he stayed calm. You know how pastors are. Oh, I do. He seems like a good man. How long has he been pastor of the church? Only about 2 years. He's still having issues with every mother of every single female in the city throwing their daughter at him. Makes him crazy, but he gets lots of free meals as young women try to show off their cooking skills by accidentally cooking too much. He shook his head. I'd feel bad for him if I didn't think it was so funny. Samara grinned. Hey, a single pastor? And he's handsome too. I don't know about handsome. Henry glared at her. Would you choose him over me? She crossed the room to him, wrapping her arms around him. Never. His voice doesn't make me go weak in the knees and want to drag him off to bed. Henry blushed. You make me crazy with some of the things you say, woman. You make me crazy with everything you say, she responded with a grin, pulling him down for a kiss. Too bad the girls are awake, he said, looking at the clock. Is it their nap time yet? Samara nodded. I'll bring them in and get them down. Meet me in the bedroom. He grinned. I like the way you think. Asterisk. Samara spent the afternoon working on laundry while Henry and the girls napped. She read in between loads, thrilled to have the house quiet. Henry finally came downstairs over 2 hours later. I can't believe I slept. I never nap. She grinned. You wore yourself out. He sighed. You wore me out, and you know it. And stop looking so pleased with yourself. She laughed. I happen to enjoy wearing you out. He helped her carry loads of laundry up the stairs to be put away, and then he grilled out for them. The rest of the day was passed with family activities, ending with some movies with the girls. After watching Frozen, the girls argued over who got to be Elsa. Samara didn't understand it. She'd rather be Anna than Elsa any day. Anna was real and full of fun. Elsa was too rigid for her tastes. As she tucked the girls into bed that night, she explained the plan for her to teach their Sunday school class for a while, and both girls squealed with delight. We want to share you with our friends, Aunt Sammy. Samara laughed. I can't wait to meet them. She was sitting on the edge of Avi's bed, and the little girl got to her knees and hugged her. I'm so glad you're our aunt. Me too. I'd marry your uncle all over again, knowing I'd get such special nieces. Samara didn't regret her marriage to Henry at all, despite all the extra work she was having to do as a result. Avi peered at her curiously. Are you going to have babies now that you're married to Uncle Henry? Samara considered that for a moment. Do you want me to have babies? She knew she wanted dozens, but she wanted to see how the little girl felt about it. Yes. Well, then maybe I'll have babies, Samara said with a grin. Will they be our brothers and sisters? Abby asked from the other bed. She was obviously more worried about the idea than Avi was. No, they'll be your cousins. You could call them your brothers and sisters if you wanted. Avi nodded. Just like we can call you Mama if we decide we want to. Just the same. Samara helped Avi get under her covers and tucked the blankets around her, kissing her forehead. Sleep sweet, my love. I love you, Aunt Sammy. Samara felt tears prick her eyes. It was the first time one of the girls had said those words to her, and she'd had no idea how they would touch her heart. I love you too, Avi. She walked to the other bed, repeating the process. Are you going to still love us after you have babies of your own? Abby asked softly, her voice full of sadness. Oh, sweetie. Of course, I will. I'll love you even more. You know why? Abby shook her head. Why? Because you'll be big sister cousins to my baby. They'll look up to you, and you'll be very important to them. But you'll always be the first kids in my heart. You were the two I got when I least expected it, so you'll be the two that I always love the best. Abby sniffled. Okay. Then you can have babies. Samara nodded regally. Thank you so much for your permission. I don't know what I would have done without it. She leaned down and kissed the little girl on her forehead before shutting off the light and leaving the room. She was still shaking her head when she went to the bedroom she shared with Henry. Why are you shaking your head? Abby thought that if we had children of our own, we wouldn't love her and Avie any longer. Well, they don't need to worry about that for a long time. I don't want kids right now. Probably not for at least 5 years or so. Samara frowned. What are we going to do if we have them? You're using birth control, right? He asked, frowning at her. She shook her head. No. I love kids. It never occurred to me you wouldn't want them right away. Are you kidding? We already have 2. I want 20. I want to have children of my own. He sighed. Maybe we can revisit that in 5 years or so. In the meantime, you should see a doctor and get on birth control. I don't want to risk an unplanned pregnancy. Does everything in your life have to happen according to your time and plan? I prefer it to. Samara brushed her teeth, and when she came out of the restroom, Henry was lying on his side, facing away from her. Apparently, sex was out of the question until she saw a doctor to get on birth control. She rolled her eyes. If God wanted her pregnant, she'd get pregnant whether she was on birth control or not, no matter what high and mighty Henry thought of it. She rolled to her side, facing away from him. If he didn't even want to hold her, that was fine with her. Stupid man. Where did he think babies came from anyway? Chapter 8. Before leaving for work, Henry reminded Samara to get into a doctor and start on birth control soon. Samara wanted to rage at him, but he had yet to see her stubborn streak. She should probably save that for after they'd been married a little longer. After walking the girls to Grandma Betty's house, she went to her office and spent a minute or two searching for nearby OBGYNs. It was time for her to go see one anyway, whether she wanted to or not. She couldn't get in until the following week, so she decided she'd text Henry and tell him he'd have to take care of the matter if he cared that much. Once that was done, she did a Skype call with Lachele to start her week. Hey boss lady. Lachele grinned. How's my favorite employee? Is Henry treating you right? Most of the time, he's doing really well. Well, you can't expect all of the time from a man who you've only been married to for a week. They take years to train. So much easier just buying a puppy. Samara laughed. I'll keep that in mind. She updated Lachele on everything that had happened that week, finishing with, I just adore those girls. I don't know that I would have agreed to the responsibility if I had known he had them, but I'd have been missing out. I've never in my life met anyone who was more of a natural-born mother than you are, Sammy Sunflower. Lachele looked down at her desk. Okay, I have a list of things for you to do this week, including 4 Skype interviews with potential clients. Have you checked your email? Not yet. I'll do that as soon as we're finished. I scheduled 2 calls today and 2 tomorrow. Did you find that you could see what you needed to see when you did them over Skype last week? Or did you feel like they were limiting you? Samara frowned. I don't think I'll ever get quite as good of a read on someone over the computer as I would in person, but I think Skype is a really close second. Did you see my notes on the man I interviewed on Thursday? Hunter something or other? Lachele leaned back in her chair and chuckled. I did. This man should never be allowed in the company of women, let alone be set up to marry some poor unsuspecting female. His is not a risk a matchmaker who likes what she does should take. He was awful, Lachele. He kept trying to talk me into going out with him. I told him I was a newlywed, and he told me that he didn't mind used goods. No. That man is a reject from Rejectville. He really does sound like a charmer. Maybe we could hook him up with Penny, Trey's sister. Samara laughed. I don't think even Penny deserves him. Okay, I'll get on the interviews for the week and see how much I can get done. She felt good after taking all day Saturday to read, like she'd recharged her batteries. How do you feel like the telecommuting is going? Is it working for you? Samara grinned. I actually kind of like it. I don't have to get dressed if I don't want to. It's nice. Well, I make sure my top half is dressed for Skype calls, but my bottom half? You'd be ashamed. Samara glanced down at the shorts she was wearing with her business blouse. Her feet were bare. Lachele laughed. I wish I didn't have to get dressed. Running two businesses is kind of wearing. I can believe that. Matrimony is a gift to the world, though, and you certainly can't close it down. Oh, I know. I guess you consider it a gift now that you and Henry have quit fighting. Samara shrugged. He's not so bad. Other than the not wanting babies thing, of course, but she wasn't about to mention that to Lachele. Maybe eventually. Well, I have an early counseling session, so I'm going to sign off. I'll be emailing. You know you can always Skype me if you need me. I know. Thanks, Lachele. Asterisk. The second week of marriage was much easier for Samara than the first. She had gotten a routine down, and did everything she had to do quickly and efficiently. By the time the weekend rolled around, she was again desperate for books, but she knew that Henry would accommodate her. He was so thankful for her positive attitude with the girls that he made certain to let her read most of the day on Saturday. As they got ready for church Sunday morning, Samara was nervous. The idea of going into a church where she felt responsible for having a preschool teacher removed from her post when she'd only been there for a week was odd, even for her. She dressed the girls carefully, putting them in matching dresses. She'd even painted their nails to match each other. Finally, she'd found the trick to telling them apart. Avi had a tiny freckle on her top lip, which made them seem more like individuals than two halves of a whole. Besides, Avi was a lot more outgoing, and Abby held a lot more of her emotions inside. Samara worried about Abby sometimes, because she seemed so sad on occasion. Once they were all ready, they met Henry downstairs. He was dressed in his suit for church, and Samara was in a blue maxi dress. She'd thought about wearing pants for her first day teaching preschool, but decided that she wanted to look nice as she met the parents. You look beautiful today, he told her, seeming a little embarrassed at complimenting her. Thank you. She nodded toward the girls. Henry's eyes widened and he nodded. Avery and Abigail? You two look like princesses this morning. Why, I'm surprised all the boys at church don't ask to be your princes. Abby giggled. Avi's prettier than me. Avi nodded. I am. We looked in the mirror last night, and I'm much prettier. Samara rolled her eyes. I'll be ready to go in a second. I want to grab a couple bottles of water. Henry nodded, glancing at his phone to check the time. We need to leave in 2 minutes. She rushed into the kitchen, took 2 bottles of water from the fridge and stuffed them in her oversized purse. She'd put lesson plans and activity sheets in her purse. She had no idea if there would be a curriculum provided for her or what, so she decided to be prepared either way. Henry drove the van to church, the girls sitting happily in the back seat, chattering away to each other. The woman she'd met the previous week, Gisela, hurried to her as soon as she arrived. I heard you're going to be teaching for a while. I'll show you around your classroom and give you your curriculum. Samara followed Gisela down the narrow hallway to the children's area, the girls right behind her. I think the curriculum is simple enough that you'll be able to just read over it and do it this morning. I'm glad you got here early. When they reached the classroom, Gisela took a big box off the shelf. This is actually the first Sunday with the new curriculum. I like to order this box for the preschool teachers, because everything you could possibly need is already included. You pretty much have to show up and teach. Sounds good to me. Samara told her, opening the box and digging through it. There were odd items inside, like a bag full of rubber bands and some huge flashcards. I'm excited to see what all is in there. There are usually 8 children for this age group. One of the kids from youth will be here to be your assistant teacher. We never leave a teacher alone in a classroom with children, because of legal issues. So someone observed what the girls told me about? And they didn't say anything? Samara was disgusted that someone had been allowed to keep teaching after being so rude to the children. Gisela flushed. The teen that told me has had problems, so I asked the teacher. When she denied it, I assumed the teen was lying. She shook her head. I've called and apologized, and she's going to be assigned to you today. I appreciate your honesty about it. Samara turned away, trying not to be angry with the other woman. If the teen had been troublesome, she understood the reasoning, but it was still difficult. Samara's hardest thing as a Christian was forgiveness. She said a quick, silent prayer that she could forgive the other woman. How long do you think you can handle the class? Gisela asked, obviously wanting to change the subject. A month or 2? I wish I could take it on forever, but I'm a newlywed and have a lot of responsibilities. She pulled the teacher's manual out of the box so she could prepare her lesson for the day. Okay. I'll check in with you after class to see how it goes for you. The girls played quietly with the wooden kitchen while Samara read quickly. At one point she looked up and both girls were wearing aprons and stirring some imaginary food. The lesson that week was about forgiveness. Samara closed her eyes and said a quick prayer that she would be able to explain the lesson as she should. The children came into the classroom one by one and Samara introduced herself to their parents. The church wasn't huge, but it wasn't small either. She'd been told they usually had about 500 in attendance for Sunday service. When the little boy Adam came into the room, Samara made a note of who he was, planning to make certain he knew he was anything but dumb. She was angry on the little boy's behalf. As soon as they spotted Adam, the twins took him over to the kitchen center with them. I'm Samara Crider. I'm Avi and Abby's new aunt. Adam's mother smiled. Oh, the twins are so sweet to Adam. They're good girls. I'm Jennifer Henderson. It's really nice to meet you. I'll be teaching this class for a short while until they find someone else. Good. It was time. Mrs. Johnson obviously doesn't love teaching 4-year-olds. I'll take good care of Adam. Samara assumed Jennifer knew what had happened, but if she didn't, it wasn't her place to tell her. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Jennifer raised a hand. Have a good time, Adam. Adam didn't even look up, obviously engrossed in whatever he was doing with the twins. I don't know why I bother. He doesn't notice anything when pretty girls are around. Samara laughed. Just don't tell my husband that. He feels a bit overprotective of the girls already. Jennifer grinned and walked away, leaving Samara to meet her teen assistant. I'm Samara Crider. The teen nodded. I'm Madison. Are you going to be mean to the kids? I'm in here because I refuse to let Abby and Avi be treated poorly. Samara sized up the teen in front of her. She was a few pounds heavier than she should have been and had blonde hair and pretty green eyes. I'm glad you're here to help me, Madison. Madison shrugged. I like playing with the little ones. She walked away from Samara, obviously knowing what she needed to do in the classroom. She went over to sit on the floor and the children all came to her, handing her books. While Samara watched the teenager read book after book, she became more and more impressed with the girl, and angrier on her behalf that no one had listened to her. Finally, Samara knew it was time to teach their short lesson on forgiveness. Everyone come to the table, please. Madison went to the cupboard behind Samara, while Samara taught the lesson, explaining about Christ's dying for the sins of everyone on the planet. So if he died so we could be forgiven, don't you think it makes sense that we should forgive others as well? Even when they don't ask? Abby asked without raising her hand. Even then. When we don't forgive, it hurts us more than it hurts the people we're mad at, Samara explained softly. Adam raised his hand shyly. Yes, Adam? Will God forgive me for thinking his name was Bob? Because that was really stupid. Samara took a seat in one of the tiny little chairs at the table, feeling as though her knees were about to go through her chest. Yes, God will forgive you for that, but there's nothing to forgive. When you don't hear someone right, and you make a mistake, God doesn't hold that against you. He's a loving, caring God. Adam seemed to think about that for a minute. I'm glad. I wouldn't want him to be mad at me for being stupid. You're not stupid. I can see how smart you are just by looking at you. Adam blinked. You can? Samara nodded emphatically. Of course, I can. She looked at Avi, knowing the girl would back her up. Don't you think Adam looks smart? He looks like the smartest boy in the whole room. It was then Samara realized the class was woefully heavy on girls. She didn't mention he was the only boy in the room. She simply smiled. See? Avi knows what she's talking about. Adam grinned happily. Samara gave them each a coloring sheet before turning to Madison, who was watching her with a smile. Thank you for saying that. Adam needed to hear it, she whispered. No one needs to be insulted for no reason, Samara responded. She saw that the teen had made up 8 small plates with goldfish crackers and had set out 8 juice boxes. Oh, I didn't realize we were supposed to give them snacks. That's part of my job. I'll pass them out. Madison walked around the table, giving each child a plate. She was happy to see more than half of them thank the teenager for the food. This class would be a joy to teach. At the end of the class, the children all played while Madison once again sat on the floor and read books. After the parents had picked them all up, Samara turned to Madison. Do you ever babysit? I don't need anyone right now, but if I do, I'd love for it to be you. You're wonderful with children. Madison smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time. I love kids. I want at least 27. I babysit sometimes. I want several of my own. Samara looked over at the twins who were playing in the kitchen center again. And I've got a good head start already. Those two are pretty special. I've gotten to work with them a lot since they came here. Madison shook her head. I never heard them speak until their teacher started to pick on Adam. Then they showed their personalities. I think they're my favorites. Samara smiled. They're pretty darn special. She felt so proud of the girls for sticking up for Adam when he needed it most. I think so. Henry walked in then, walking straight to Samara. How was your class? He looked nervous, asking. Oh, it was really good, Samara answered. The kids were great, and I had a fabulous helper. Henry nodded at Madison. I know your dad. Madison nodded. Yeah. Everybody does. She waved at the girls. I'll see you next week. Henry watched her go. Did I scare her off? I don't think so. She seems a little skittish. Yeah, she's had a lot of problems with depression. Her dad said it helped a lot when she started working with the little ones. I can believe it. Samara related the way Madison had been with the children. If we ever need a sitter in the evenings, I want to call her. Okay. He glanced around the room. Are you ready to go? Yeah. She looked over at the girls. You need to clean up, so we can leave. They automatically took off their aprons and hung them over the corner of the kitchen and picked up the few pots and pans they'd scattered around. Samara grabbed her teacher's book and her purse. Ready when you are. Do you want to go to the diner again today? We don't eat out much, and I think it's a good break for you. Samara nodded. That would be really nice if you don't mind. I don't mind at all. Asterisk. Samara was nervous at the doctor Friday morning. She'd been seeing the same doctor since she'd turned 16, and the idea of a new one was nerve-wracking. At least she'd been able to find a female doctor, which eased her mind a bit. She welcomed the time in the waiting room, reading on her current book. Sometimes she missed the days when she could just sit and read all night, but usually she was simply thankful for the new family she had. She went back and peed in the cup before waiting in the examination room for the doctor. She was completely immersed in Cindy Caldwell's newest mail-order bride book when the doctor stepped into the room. "Mrs. Crider?" It took Samara a minute to realize the doctor was there. The book was good, and she hated to put it down even for a moment. "Yes." The doctor held out her hand. "I'm Dr. Kelly. What brings you in today?" Samara sighed. "I'm newly married, and I need to get on birth control. My husband assumed I was already on it, and I assumed he wanted kids, so, well, it's time, I guess." "You want to start taking birth control?" The doctor looked at her chart with a frown. "When was the first day of your last menstrual cycle?" Samara thought about that. "I don't even know. I got married 2.5 weeks ago, so probably a couple weeks before that." "Are your cycles usually regular?" "Usually, but not always. I'm sure this one was late because I married and had twin nieces to deal with. It's been a stressful time, but good." The doctor pulled up a chair across from Samara, taking her wrist and feeling for her pulse. When she was finished, she listened to her heart. After the cursory exam, she looked at Samara. "I can't put you on birth control." Samara frowned. The doctor had barely examined her. Even if something was wrong, how would she know already? "Why not?" "I'm healthy." "You seem to be." "Birth control isn't good for unborn babies, though." Samara stared at the doctor for a moment, before her jaw dropped. "But, already?" Dr. Kelly nodded. "I'm afraid so." Samara felt the emotions warring inside her. She was pregnant and wanted to dance around the room with glee. She'd never imagined it could happen so fast, but she was thrilled. A baby of her own. The twins would be so good with the baby. Maybe she'd have a boy, and it would complete their family. But Henry wasn't ready for a baby yet. Would he be angry? She hoped not, but she couldn't be sure. She hadn't really known him long enough to know how he'd feel. "Mrs. Crider?" Samara looked back at the doctor. "I'm trying to decide if I should be happy dancing or sad, because my husband doesn't want one so soon." "No matter what he wants, you're pregnant, so you might as well celebrate," Dr. Kelly said matter-of-factly. "How are you feeling? Any nausea yet? Exhaustion?" Samara shook her head. "I'm tired, but with twins at home, I should be. My husband has custody of his 4-year-old nieces." The doctor smiled at that. "Oh, yes. You should definitely be tired then. They're wonderful little girls." Samara shook her head. "I'm digressing." "A baby, huh?" The doctor laughed. "A baby. Is there any chance you were pregnant when you married?" "None at all." "Then I'd say for it to already be showing up on a urine test, you're about 5 weeks along. We record the date of your last menstrual cycle as day 1. She got up to give Samara some literature. "I'd put your due date in mid-June." Samara was stunned. "So where do we go from here?" "I'll want to see you once a month or so. I'll do a sonogram at your next visit to make sure the baby is on track developmentally." The doctor opened the door. "Congratulations. Go ahead and make your next appointment on the way out." Samara left the room in a daze. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Samara felt as if she was almost dream-walking the rest of the day. She didn't seem to touch the ground as she walked. She'd always wanted to have a bunch of children, and even though they'd planned to prevent, she was pregnant. Maybe Henry wouldn't be thrilled, but she was. She and the girls made supper together as usual. She decided to let them make pizza, but she made the dough from scratch. The girls got to put the toppings on, and it was fun for all three of them. "Do we have to have sauce?" "I don't like sauce on my pizza," Avi asked, her nose wrinkling. "I don't want crust on my pizza," Abby complained. "Both pizzas are going to have sauce, crust, and cheese. You can decide what other toppings go on them." Samara had browned some ground beef and sausage. She also had bell peppers, olives, and mushrooms, as well as a pack of pepperoni and some ham she'd cut into small pieces. "You two make that one, and I'll make this one." Her first thought had been to have the girls each make a pizza, but she could tell that she wouldn't want to eat whatever it was they had in mind. She added a bit of all the ingredients to the pizza she would share with Henry, and even threw on a bit of extra cheese. The girls, without discussing it, made a pepperoni border across the middle of their pizza. Avi added pepperoni, extra cheese, and ham to hers. Abby added pepperoni and ground beef. "That looks delicious." Samara complimented them. "I can't wait till Uncle Henry gets home so we can eat." "Me neither." Samara preheated the oven and put both pizzas on top, to be popped in as soon as Henry walked in the door. She wasn't certain yet how she was going to tell him about the baby, but she knew she needed to. It wasn't something she could hide for long. She'd filled the prescription the doctor had given her for prenatal vitamins and started taking them that afternoon. When Henry walked into the door, she rushed to him, kissing him. "Shower quick. The girls and I made pizza." Henry frowned. "Frozen pizza?" She shook her head. "Of course not. Do you really think I would serve that? Homemade pizza? I'll hurry." He took the stairs two at a time in his rush to shower before dinner. Samara put both pizzas into the oven. The girls were sitting at the table reading early readers to one another. When one had trouble with a word, the other was usually able to help. Samara loved watching them. "I need the table for dinner," she told them. The girls immediately took their books into the family room, but they didn't stop reading. While Samara set the table, she daydreamed about what their baby would be like. She wanted a little girl whom she could dress in frilly pink dresses. No, she wanted a little boy who would stick up for his older cousin sisters. No, she definitely wanted a little girl who she could teach to defend herself. Or a little boy who looked just like Henry. Oh, the truth was, she'd be happy with whatever God chose to give her. A perfect baby with 10 fingers and 10 toes was all she really cared about. She'd tell Henry as soon as the twins were down for the night. Surely he'd be just as happy as she was. Chapter 9. When she climbed into bed with Henry that night, Samara was all set to tell him about the baby. When he took her in his arms and kissed her, she decided she could wait just a little while. The baby wasn't going anywhere after all. When she woke on Saturday morning, she looked over and saw a note on Henry's pillow. "Took the girls to the park. We'll have a picnic and spend the whole day. Enjoy your day of solitude." Samara smiled at the note. She'd have to put off telling Henry about the baby, but a whole day to herself? She didn't know what to do first. She rushed downstairs and fixed breakfast for one. She would have skipped eating, but she knew she needed to eat regular meals for the baby. Then she went into the bathroom and filled the tub. A whole day of nothing but reading. It was like it was her birthday and Christmas all rolled into one. Bless Henry for realizing what she needed. She finished 3 books before they came home at dinner time. "I brought tacos," Henry told her. Samara blinked. "Tacos? You mean I don't even have to cook?" She threw her arms around his neck. "You're the best husband ever." He laughed. "You can say that as many times as you want." The girls chattered nonstop through supper, talking about all the things they'd done that day. "We missed you, Aunt Sammy," Abby said as she finished telling her about a new friend they'd met at the park. "You don't like parks?" Samara smiled. "I do like parks, but sometimes I just need a day to be alone." "I needed that today." "How many books did you read on your alone day?" Avi asked. Shaking her head, Samara laughed. "Everyone thinks they know me so well." "How many?" Henry asked. "Only 3. Abby frowned. "That's not very many, Aunt Sammy." "Do you need Avi and me to teach you to read faster?" "We read 3 books while supper cooks." Henry laughed, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Yeah, let the girls teach you to read faster." "I want to see how that works for you, Sammy." Samara made a face at him before looking at the girls. "The books I read are really, really long, and there are no pictures." "No pictures?" "They sound boring," Avi told her, crunching into her taco. Asterisk. Samara was feeling guilty on the way to church on Sunday, because she hadn't yet told Henry about the baby. He had asked if she'd seen the doctor to make certain he could stop using protection when they made love, but when she started to tell him about the baby, he'd cut her off with a kiss. It hadn't been hard to distract her. She was dreading telling him, after all. She had to get up the nerve to tell him, but he didn't make it easy. She knew he didn't want a baby, but maybe once he knew there was one on the way, he'd change his mind. A father of one of the girls in her class stopped in to get his daughter. "So you must be the girl Henry married." "He sure lucked out." Samara made a face. "What does that mean?" "Well, you're gorgeous, you cook, you clean, you take care of kids, and he gets to do whatever he wants like he's single again." "He does?" The man laughed. "Well, is he the one giving the girls baths and picking them up? Is he cooking the meals?" "No, that's all on you. He got a free nanny with fringe benefits." "Lucky Henry." Samara frowned. She hoped with everything inside her that wasn't the way Henry saw her. "I guess." When Henry came into the classroom to get her and the girls a short time later, she frowned at him. She didn't know if it was the pregnancy hormones playing with her mind or something he'd actually done, but she felt inexplicably angry with him. "Are you only married to me so you can have free babysitting, cleaning, and meals?" Henry gaped at her for a moment. "Why do you ask that?" "Because it seemed okay in the beginning, but it doesn't now." "Is that why you married me?" She crossed her arms over her chest, ready to fight right then and there if she needed to. Henry frowned. "Well, sure, it's why I married you in the beginning. It's not how I feel now that I've met you and come to care about you." Samara folded her arms across her chest. "You care about me, do you?" Henry shook his head, baffled by her strange behavior. "You know I do. I wouldn't have taken the girls out yesterday to give you a day alone to read if I didn't." "Why are you even asking me that?" Samara considered his words. "I guess that's true." She really didn't want to fight with him in a church anyway. She'd wait until they were home to hash everything out. He needed to know about the baby, and she needed to know where she stood. What if he kicked her out because of the baby? They went out to lunch as they usually did on Sundays after church, but when they got home, Samara changed the normal routine. "Why don't you girls go lie down for your nap while I talk to your uncle?" Abby and Avi exchanged a look. "You're not going to tuck us in?" Avi seemed appalled at the very idea. Samara realized she was taking out her frustration with Henry on the girls. They were used to a certain routine and there was no reason for her to change it, just because she was upset. "Of course, I'll tuck you in." She looked at Henry. "Wait right here. We're going to talk." Henry sat down in the family room, wondering what on earth had gotten into his sweet wife. She was angry with him for some inexplicable reason. While he waited, he thought about what she'd asked him in the church. He had married her just for free cleaning and child tending, and to give the girls stability in their lives. He didn't feel like he'd ever hidden that from her. She meant a great deal more to him now, though. When Samara came back to the family room, she sat down across from him, where he couldn't touch her and mess with her emotions. As soon as he touched her, her hormones went nuts, and she wanted to melt into his arms. This discussion was too important for that. "Why did you marry me, Henry?" No reason to beat around the bush when you could just ask the question right out. Henry frowned. "I married you for the exact reasons you think I did. I married you because I needed stability for the girls. I needed someone who could cook something better than Pop-Tarts. I needed the twins to have a mother. I never intended to touch you." Samara closed her eyes. "But you did touch me. So now what?" He sighed. "I'm not sure what you want me to say, Sammy. Yes, I touched you, and I plan on touching you some more. I'm glad we got married, and not just for the girls, for me. Lachele did a good job when she matched us. We belong together. So what if I did something that made you angry? Would you kick me out?" She had no idea if he'd be angered by her news, but she had to tell him. She'd put it off long enough. He frowned. "Like what?" "Well, what if it wasn't on purpose and it just happened? Something I had no control over? What are you trying not to tell me?" His voice was angry. Obviously, he didn't want to hear what she had to say. Samara sucked in a breath and closed her eyes. "Will you kick me out?" "If you haven't cheated on me, then no. If you have cheated on me, I'm not sure I could ever get past that." Henry glared at her. "Have you cheated on me? You don't even know anyone here." "Of course, I haven't cheated on you." "Don't be ridiculous." "Then what is all this about? What are you worried is going to make me angry?" Samara sighed, saying a quick silent prayer for strength. "When I saw the doctor on Friday, she couldn't put me on birth control." Henry frowned. "I'll just keep using condoms then. I hate them, but I can deal with that." "No big deal." Was that her whole problem? Because it was easily solvable. "It is a big deal." She looked him straight in the eyes. "She won't put me on birth control, because it might hurt the baby." Henry's eyes widened. He felt like he'd been kicked in the stomach. "Baby? But, we just barely got married." "I know." She shrugged. "I hope you're not mad." He closed his eyes, leaning back on the couch, struggling with his emotions. On one hand, he hadn't wanted her to get pregnant so soon. It wasn't part of his 5-year plan, and his 5-year plan had already been upset by the twins and his marriage. This would throw it completely off course. On the other hand, he loved the idea of her having his baby. A child of their own for them to raise, not someone else's. "And you're worried that I'm going to kick you out because you're pregnant with my child?" "Well, you made it really clear you weren't ready for a baby yet. That you wanted to wait." Had she been worried for no real reason? Waiting would have been ideal. He shrugged. "I have this 5-year plan." 5-year plan? Really? It was the last thing she'd expected him to say. "In 5 years, I was going to be ready to start looking for a wife, and then children would be a natural consequence. But I inherited the girls, and I love them dearly. I wouldn't give them up for anything. So I told myself I was still on track with my plan, but I needed someone to help me raise them. I decided I could put off sex with my new wife for 5 years. I didn't think it would be a problem." Samara laughed. 5 years? You didn't last 3 days. Henry frowned at her. "I'm aware." He shook his head. "I don't feel like I'm ready to be a father. It's not that I don't care for you, because I do. I just feel like I should have waited until I was ready financially and emotionally." "Is anyone ever really ready?" He sighed. I guess not. I thought I should wait until I was. I wanted to have all my ducks in a row. Well, your ducks are waddling in every direction. How do you feel now? Henry held his hand out to her, and she stood, walking to him. He pulled her down onto his lap, holding her close. How do I feel? I'm in love with you. I've been in love with you since the night we first made love. I never would have let it go so far if I wasn't. He pulled her head down to his, and kissed her sweetly. How do you feel now? She smiled. Relieved. I wasn't sure how to have this conversation with you. Especially since I thought that you only cared about me for the things I did around the house. Have you been sick? The twins' mom spent months doing nothing but throwing up. Samara shook her head. No, I haven't been sick yet, but the doctor said it's really too early for that. He put his hand over her flat stomach. It's hard to believe there's a baby in there already. I know. Lachele is going to go nuts. Dr. Lachele? Why's that? She has a wall decorated with pictures of all the babies that have come from matrimony matches. She calls them her matrimony munchkins. Are you serious? Samara nodded emphatically. Oh, the woman is certifiable. That's why she's so good at what she does. He laughed. I guess she will be happy then. He looked at her. What about you? You've got so much going on right now. You're working full-time, taking care of the girls and all the housework and cooking, teaching Sunday school. Can you handle all that? Samara shrugged. Maybe I'll hire someone to come in and clean once a week. That would give me more time to read. It would help me out a lot. Take some of the burden off of me. She smiled at him, hoping he hadn't caught her comment about reading. He just laughed. I think that's a great idea. That way you can just deal with the girls and your work. And cooking, of course. Of course. He pulled her down and kissed her again. I'm sorry you didn't feel like you could talk to me about this. I'm thrilled. I shouldn't be, but I am. I love you, and you're having my baby. I can't complain a bit. Samara smiled. I love you too, you know. Yup, I know. You do? How? If you hadn't loved me, you'd have run off as soon as the girls told you about their skin falling off if they bathed too much. That was my proof. Samara laughed. You're a mess. Did you know that? He shrugged. I'm your mess. Epilogue. Samara, don't keep me in suspense. I know you found out the sex of the baby today. You need to tell me if I'm having a granddaughter or a grandson. Lachele glared at Samara from her monitor. Samara shrugged. What if I want you to be surprised? She hadn't even told Henry yet. Oh, come on, Sammy Sunflower. Don't do this to me. Does it have a tallywhacker or a petunia? Lachele was practically begging. Not telling. You're flying out for my gender reveal party this weekend anyway. You can wait that long. I can, but I don't want to. That's just too bad. I'm not even telling Henry until the party, so you don't get to know either. As your employer, I order you to tell me what the sex of your baby is. Samara just laughed. You couldn't do without me. Nope. You'll find out just as soon as everyone else does. When the cake is cut. Samara put her finger on the key that would end her call with Lachele. Goodbye, Lachele. See you this weekend. Lachele stared at the blank monitor. She hung up on me. I can't believe she'd do that. I'm going to fly out there and strangle her. In Kansas, Samara laughed softly, patting her belly. She's going to freak out when she realizes there's a tallywhacker and a petunia. There sure are a lot of twins around here. She grinned as she thought of how surprised Henry would be. She'd known for 2 months she was having twins, but she decided she needed to give him a bit more time before she threw off his 5-year plan. Again.